Welcome to this chapter, and here we'll cover one of the most important variations you will face in the Benoni, which is they don't want to enter the Benoni. I mean, it's with knight f3, with knight c3, with dc5, and also with e3, which are the main contenders. Usually people that are kind of afraid to enter the Benoni or the Volga, and the Benko, also called, try to start with knight f3 straight away. Because it's much more healthy now. Against c5 is much more interesting, I feel, with white to kind of do something else with e3, c3, or whatever. And playing c4, c5, maybe some opponents were expecting Nimzo Indian, were expecting King's Indian, and they regret immediately. And they try to turn it down with knight f3. Here we briefly will cover first all the sidelines, but I feel they are not very good. I feel dc, just e6, as normal we will just take the pawn on c5, and basically these kind of positions we have different ways to approach it. If you have experience with the Queen's Gambit, maybe you can go for d5 and play basically a reversed Queen's Gambit accepted. But I also suggest a bit more pragmatic approach with b6, and basically you want to achieve as well some kind of a Queen Gambit accepted, but preventing the isolated pawn. That some people might struggle if you don't have experience with the isolated pawn, and it's even harder to, let's say, justify it with a tempo down, because we are playing with black. But for instance, bishop b7, and then the bishop on c5 goes to e7, and then we will be able to play c5, and ideally our knight from b8 will go to d7, and then go to c5, and we have both knights here, and then both bishops here, yeah? So basically we'll have both bishops on the main, most important diagonals, and both knights controlling the center ahead of our big pieces, which are the queens and the rooks. This is quite known if you already play the Queen's Gambit accepted with white, but I feel this is a better approach to these kind of positions, because it gets tricky from my experience when our opponents would switch or would try to do something more passive and not related to the Benoni structures, because you need to change the chip. So I feel it's good that we cover a bit, at least briefly, on how white can annoy us. Knight c3, there are some variations where knight c3 is interesting, and we will see them. But here I don't think it's the case, because queen d5, knight c6, and basically this is some kind of, let's say, Maroczy setup, but with 2 tempos down for white, or 3, I don't know. And after e6, bishop b4, and d5, this should be more than fine. Nothing too fancy for black, or white. And basically we get control of the center, and we can choose to play more like a hedgehog scheme, or try to get the center easily. I don't know, it's just too comfortable. And finally we have e3, which is not grievous at all, but after g6 we can just stay in the Benoni field, and I feel this is a bit more precise. And castle, and now here to put some I don't know, some concrete stuff here, I think cd is the most practical way to play this position. If knight d4, we just play d5, and this position is just, I mean, is some kind of a Catalan. We have this strong bishop, but it's also kind of related to the Benoni spirit, that we have a strong bishop, a knight on c6, and then we'll keep developing the pieces, and the more that we develop, the better, yeah? And after ed4, d5, and basically we get the isolated pawn, we get some kind of a tarrasch, but we prevent the most critical lines, I feel, for white in this case. And basically playing something like dc and knight a5 might be the easiest way, because we get all the light squares, we get a nice blockade, and then we will just develop all the pieces. Maybe knight d5, maybe rook c8, the knight goes to c4. I don't know, this feels pretty easy. I try to cover how white can be creative. I actually played this with white against the King's Indian. And you would think, how can we enter to the King's Indian this way? So basically, for instance, my opponent would play g6, knight c3. Okay, it's a bit off topic, but you can see how having experience in different kind of structures and positions might be helpful. So here I would play, h3. This is main line. Well, this was my main line with white. And here, after d5, I know this is interesting, like CD and E5, it's interesting, but here I played ED and transposed to some kind of Tarash, because these positions I know much better than my opponent, and actually I'll play him pretty soon. So yeah, this kind of side experience allows you to have some incredible flexibility and more practical approach, and you can use as well what you know with the opposite color as well as a reference. Okay, without much further ado, we start with knight f3, which is the main line. After knight f3, white doesn't want to enter the more rigid pawn structures of the Benko or the Benoni and wants to just have a peaceful development. It concedes a bit of space in the center, and basically here I'll propose taking on d4 straight away. This move order gives us a bit more of a spicy in opening, because here after e6 white can play a different range of moves, which is why I prefer this direct Benoni approach with c5, because now e3, for instance, would enter in some Queen Gambit's positions, very symmetrical ones, let's say after d5. And white can also choose for g3 and sped up the development. I actually played this with white. This move order would be more logical if after e6, g3, c5, which is quite conventionally known as a very good Benoni version for us, and now knight f3. So yeah, this is kind of a very normal move order. So here after knight f3, I prefer to give just take and just more straightforward approach, and not allow white to have so many fail-safes and some easy, let's say, answers. So after knight d4, we play e5, and here white has a huge range of movements with the knight, but most of them are just bad, I would say. Let's start with knight c2, just d5, and we get space in the center, and the position is just pretty simple. And now knight b4, and white can get even a bit worse, because normal play would be exchanging, and now king e7. And the thing is, white has a bishop that his pawn structure doesn't help him shine, and our bishop is completely the opposite. And now we'll get the hang of the d4 square with the knight, and then rook d8, the bishop goes out, and actually white is already into trouble. So this is an example of, okay, we just get the space and don't get too, let's say, obsessed to get counterplay, get a challenging position. I mean, as much as we can in this course, we will look forward to create some mess, but at some point white has a very wide range of options that sometimes don't allow us to get a crazy position, but we still need to keep playing accurately. So here after knight b3 is pretty much similar, and the knight on b3 is actually very awkward, because if we realize there is not much interesting jumps here, but here white has this subtle idea with bishop d2 to then have this development with knight c3, but here with just some precision, the queen on e6 and the bishop on e7, and the queen will be out of the d file, so our rook will come onto the d8. And here a very important thematic idea is whenever we have a knight on b3, a5 is strong to loosen up this knight. For instance, if we force a4, then the queen will be kind of stuck defending the knight. This is very common. Like if we had the knight on g6, h4 would be a really reasonable move to take care of. And so basically, we have some simple strategic position with this queen e6, which is kind of precise. Yeah? And then knight f3 is kind of the last option. Knight f5, I won't consider it as an interesting option, since after d5 we just gain a tempo. So knight f3, knight c6, and now basically white can play passive with e6, but d5, we just take everything. And here a3 to prevent knight b4. Here f6 is another important concept as well. If you play the queen's gambit accepted, this is what you dream of with white, to play f3 and e4, in this case f6 and e5, because the knight on f3 and the bishop on c1 as well are kind of restricted thanks to our pawn chain, and we have both bishops, both knights pointing to the queen side, and we'll be freely able to, I don't know, just develop all and then put the rooks into action. Again, I try to leave you with positions that focus on development. Yeah, I try to stop the line when we have an easy development and all our following moves are kind of logical. So this is the case here as well. And now white can try to play knight c3 and to prevent us from playing d4, d5, but after bishop b4, we just want to take if it was possible, because the c4 pawn is very frail and weak, and we will be able to play, like, for instance, queen a5 later. Why? Because we want to pressure c3, but we also want to prevent bishop a3 and bishop d6. And basically we start with this, and then later on we can play like something like b6, bishop a6, d6, bishop e6, knight e4. I don't know, we have many chances. And bishop d2 is kind of a must, and after castle we just take. And this is very similar to the English. Again, I want to use these sidelines to showcase some variations that could be interesting, like f c4 e5, knight c3, knight f6, and here, or bishop b4, let's say, and for instance queen c2, no, if knight f6, think knight f3, and queen e7, and sometimes these kind of positions, white just plays e3, and here with black we want just to take on c3, take, castle, and then play d5. Yeah. So this is very similar. You can get the same idea. So again, at least if they try to do for a sideline, I'll try you to get some important knowledge that can help you in other lines. So after knight f3, cd4, knight d4, e5, we enter again to the main line here, which is knight b5. After knight b5, the idea for white is to pressure with knight d6 check, and basically here we don't have that much alternative, as if we try to play knight c6, knight d6 is very annoying. We don't want to give up the bishop exchange. If you want to play bishop before check, for instance, bishop d2, and then late, or knight c3, and then we'll still need to solve the problem with knight d6. So basically here there is a very funny and peculiar answer, which is not that common, which is d5. This move should be considered bad objectively, because after cd5 we cannot retake on d5, because if we would take with a knight, there is this simple tactic with queen d5, and we are losing a whole piece here. But if we try to play a6 first, then knight c3, and suddenly the d5 pawn is defended, and white will follow with e4, and basically we will be left with just a pawn down. But here the idea is to just give up the pawn and now play bishop c5. And basically we have a lot of development. We're already castling, and white is quite far away from that. And white has some small troubles. For instance, both knights are kind of annoying themselves, like both they will flow through c3, or in the case a3, which is not likable. In general, you don't want to have knights on the side. And also this knight on b1 will love to go to d2 or c3, then it will annoy the bishop on c1, or the queen on d1, basically. And there, on all of that, you need to take into account that the d5 pawn is also very exposed, so it's not that easy to defend. So here white has many alternatives already, and the most challenging is this move, but here we'll start with e3. It's a bit more passive, but let's say white just wants to keep developing. Again, we cannot take on d5 thanks to the trick on c7, so we just castle. And now white can just try to defend the pawn. Seems very reasonable. Now just castling, and then, I don't know, defending on d5, and then it feels like white solved everything. But here just bishop f5, we just keep developing. And white just castles, and white might be like, okay, I have an extra pawn for free. Knight b d7, and white might feel, okay, he doesn't even care, or she doesn't even care, like, oh, what's going on? And now white has a couple choices, for instance, knight c3 or knight c3. And since we have a threat of knight b6, sorry, threatening the d5 pawn. So basically this is the most advisable move, because otherwise we have a6, b5, and the knight will be struggling here. But here we just play e4, which is one of the most important strategical concepts here. White is kind of left out of the king side, or the pieces are kind of covered in d5, but not really creating any activity, creating any threats, trying to occupy any squares. And here we have many interesting attacking patterns. For instance, if white just tries to play knight d2, we can just start with rook c8. And the idea is after knight b3, let's say, or b3, black can go for bishop d6, and we are already threatening bishop h2. Let's say a passive move like this, we can just take. and now knight g4, and then queen h4 check. Yeah. In case of something passive like, well, something like h3, now we can even choose to play something like bishop b8, which is very interesting. Bishop b8 or queen e7 is also interesting to play queen e5 or queen c7 in the case of bishop b8. And suddenly white doesn't have a suitable answer. And it's not that easy because we will also threaten the knight on c3 and the mate on h2. And I want to just give you some attacking patterns here. And after h3, we can also choose to play knight e5. And what is this idea? The idea is to threaten the bishop on c4, but mostly to play queen d7 and to sacrifice here, which is more fun, yeah? So the thing is, white, again, the main point is that white has all the pieces here on the queen side, kind of isolated from the king side, and we can have some attacking patterns very easily. And also the pawn on d5 kind of blocks all the pieces from white, so it's not that easy to create anything with it. And the bishop on d6 basically is a great attacker and a great defender at the same time. So these kind of structures are very important. You can also find this in the queen gambit is accepted with white. Whenever black just doesn't play very active, black usually already had something like a3, b4, bishop b2. That's why it's not that easy to perform all this stuff. So here we are very much ahead on the development. We optimize the development, and this is a great example of how the opening might go. So white needs to move the knight. Yeah, let's see that white. Let's see what happens if white brings up this knight and kind of doesn't pay attention to what can happen to this knight. So here we just castle first. Why we would castle here? The thing is, the knight on b5 is terrible. Yeah, it has some problems, objective problems there, and actually wants to go back home. So if we play a6 quickly here, and then we will help white. Now b4, now knight c2. Basically, we're forcing white to improve their pieces, and after b4, knight a4 would gain an interesting tempo, and white is kind of happy because now the knight on c2 is more useful than on b5, and we still owe some tempos to Kaisa. We need to castle, we need to develop all the pieces. So again, be careful with the automatic moves. And here castle is much more important. And now white needs to do something dynamic and to keep with the development. Now knight a3 would be a bit stupid, a bit slow, let's say. So white would try to play e3 or g3 to defend the d5 pawn. Let's start with e3, for instance, and now a6, knight a3, and e4. And this is kind of similar to what we had before, and we'll have more or less the same play. Here it's a bit different since white did not spend that much time with the bishop. Maybe queen e7, rook d8 is the safest approach. And then we can choose whether to play b5 to annoy the knights, whether to take the d5 pawn, whether to just put the knight on e5 to get some control. And basically we have somewhat of freedom, yeah. Since white cannot afford to play a4, at some point, for instance, if knight c4, please play b5 first, because if white can play a4, white can be very happy because those knights would be untouchable for a while. So this position is already much worse for white if you get the references. And yeah, and for instance, after g3, this is a very, let's say, concrete line. A very, I prefer in general to give practical choices, but here I felt like if we don't play precise, white would be very happy to just play bishop g2, just move the knight away, and then just keep developing. Yeah, maybe bishop e3, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, most likely bishop e3 to exchange this bishop, and then it's very simple for white. So that's why here I try to give you some precise moves. So here the move is bishop d7. And the idea is that we want to push with taking on b5, playing queen a5 and b5, and basically white needs to do something about it. Something like bishop g2 might get into trouble already with queen a5. That's also why I like it. And white dots cannot really move the knight because after knight a3 we just get this knight for free, and after a4 white might realize that we have a double pin and it's not possible to recapture. So knight a3 is the expected move, And now b5. Basically, we create some annoyances. And here we can compare how this was much more efficient than playing a6. Yeah, because the bishop here can give us some extra ideas. So now if white, let's say white just wants to play passive. Like white, we also need to consider that white decided not to enter the Benoni. So white is looking for passive positions, to simple positions to develop, and don't care about counterplay or complicated. So again, that's going in our favor, yeah, psychologically. And after b4, maybe one, knight g4, we keep let's say creating threats. And now e3, bishop f5. And the idea of playing knight g4 first is now it weakened a lot the pawn structure, and also we have some let's say e4 later on will be much more enjoyable for our interests, because there will be two holes here, and also the king side will be very weak on the light squares. So that's why this move knight g4, that maybe you could say, okay, what if we play bishop f5 straightforward, bishop g2 here, and here e4. Here this bishop has some room to move. Also bishop e3 is very pleasant move to play. And yeah, so basically this would be fine for white, I guess. So basically we invest a couple tempi, so white cannot afford to develop all the queen side, and he's cramped here. So basically this is a bit more dynamic. This requires a bit of precision, but we get excellent positions. And now if white decides to take, we play queen a5, and here we entered some weird variation that is very peculiar, I would say. But it's very dynamic. So here we would just want to develop. Yeah. After queen b3, we're saying, okay, how can we get another threat? No, let's analyze this position objective. You know, you are here on the board, and you are complaining because, come on, Albert didn't tell me what to do here. Yeah, he just said, no, this is good for the engine. So what can we do? Let's start with a6. It's the most immediate threat. But here knight a3 would be simple enough for white, and I don't see a follow-up. This knight will not be able to move for a while. Now bishop f5 and knight d7 is very slow. Yeah. So here we have a different approach, which is to play knight a6. Now we immediately threaten rook b8. So white needs to do something. Again, we remind our viewers that a4 is not a way to defend it, because there is a double pin. So this pawn is pinned to this rook, and this knight is pinned to this king. So again, something like bishop g2 and relying on a4 would be very wrong, because white cannot take this piece back. So bishop d2 is a must, and after rook a b8, now e3. Basically white kind of secured, covering this pin, kind of secured the b5 knight. So here, after rook b8, again we need to think. Like, okay, Albert was saying this was a good, but what move can we do? If we play something passive like rook c8, white might be happy to just try to castle fast. So we need to keep creating some small threats, yeah? Because after rook c8, okay, this looks like we are doing something, but bishop e2, and I'm not sure if we are really doing anything. Or maybe even a4 to just... a4 is not that AB is possible, but maybe it can free the rook later on and maybe just secure the square. I don't know. But here the move is bishop b4. Because here immediately we are threatening bishop b5, since the queen is not defending the knight anymore. And knight c5 is also a great way to improve the knight on a6. Yeah? So knight a3 is a must, because otherwise we just can get gain material. And after knight c5, we have some very interesting concept, which is not that common. But here we have too many pieces, let's say. This is good. Now we have all the pieces attacking, and white is still 2 rooks down for now. And some move like queen c4, knight c4 would be terrible for white. We simply threaten knight d2, most direct threat. And now after knight e4, which you can just retake. And basically the bishop on d2 will fall. And white cannot even take b4 because we have the rook b8. Yeah? And basically this would be completely losing, because now we'll be doing a discover check. And queen d1 has more or less the same outcome after knight c4. So basically white have to do queen c2. But here again, we play knight ce4, and the knight on a3 is very much exposed, and the position is kind of troublesome. For instance, some move like knight ce4 might be very interesting because it feels like, I mean, knight gets out, now we'll be able to take, knight defends the bishop on d2, and here I feel bishop c3 might be an excellent and not so common way to answer this position. Our main take here is to take on d5, our main idea, sorry, and then we suddenly realize how weak is this rook and this diagonal. Suddenly we have themes with knight g5 or knight d2 and to check on f3, and the light squares are completely off for white. And this would be a really good compensation. I don't see a way for white to just manage to get out of this. And in case we take the queen, now we just take on d2, we check. Basically, white has a queen up, but we have two pieces for now. If white doesn't want to give up the queen, we can just take another piece. And this is just the best, I mean, one of the best examples I've seen of how three pieces are much more worth than the queen. Now our last rook is coming, and basically likely b2 will fall, or the knight will create some havoc, the bishop through here. I mean, white will lose very soon. And if white tries to keep up the queen, we just enter on the 7th rank, I guess. This should be more than enough. White is so passive. We will be able to retake both pawns, or even just go for the kill. Yeah, and just double the rooks. I don't know. We have so many good options here. Maybe just taking on d5 would be good enough, because here white, for instance, to analyze this position is like white doesn't have any kind of activity, and white will have the king on the center for a while. Why not just retake the pawn and just keep playing for the initiative? For instance, this would be an interesting approach. Yeah. And yeah, so basically white is kind of forced to play bishop g2 to just pray and try to castle. And now after knight d2, rook d2, we have another position that, okay, we need to keep creating threats. Rook fc8, we threaten on c3. And now white needs to do something, because rook takes c3 is actually a threat, or bishop c3, let's say white castles, we just take and we get an extra piece for free. So rook c1 is a must, and now this position would be very difficult, I feel, for many players. That's why I wanted to take some time to explain it with the videos. We kind of drain out our chances here, because there is not immediate captures. White can take and retake everything and later on castle. And here if we take and take, white can castle and rook b2. So here we are starting to see a pattern. Yeah, white wants to castle no matter what, and white will be happy. So here a very subtle move is queen a6. Yeah. Queen a6 kind of guarantees us that white doesn't castle, and white doesn't have a way to just prevent it easily. For instance, something like queen e2, that looks somewhat reasonable. We could play rook c3, I guess. It should be good enough. And now the idea is that this knight is loose as well. And after queen a6, just rook a3 check, for instance. I think many more moves should win, but this is the most direct. So white needs to play bishop f1, and here we could be happy with queen a5, but we want to play queen a4, which is a more subtle idea. Basically, we want to have some presence with knight e4, so since we threaten knight e4, white is still forced to go back, and now we can just play rook c3. It doesn't matter much, we can take with the bishop, but this is a bit more fancy. And here the idea is that we have knight e4, and check how this queen is much more useful here, and white is more or less lost here. After take, white cannot afford to castle, because after here we threaten mate on g2, and now after queen d5. The thing is, white needs to defend f3, but after rook f2, queen d1 is made, and if in case of e4, we could even take on a2, and then b2 would likely fall, and basically the king is so frail and weak and exposed, and the knight is on the side, which is not good. I mean, too many things that are wrong for white. And if white tries to do something like, I don't know, just queen c2, we just check, and basically the white never castles, and we will follow with bishop f5, and basically all the discovered checks are a threat right now, and white is busted, because we don't even need to win material. After queen b2, we will have amazing endgames as well, without the rook playing, with this knight on the sideline, and some threats on f2 or b1, yeah? So, yeah, I wanted to take a bit of attention to this line because this is, I feel, really instructive and really helpful for you, how to deal with initiative, how to keep on going. And okay, so basically we checked all this line, and here we are left with the main line, which is going back with the knight straightforward. Now, with the main line, white just tries to defend d5 and just has some flexibility to play around with. And here the main idea is just to play g3. In case of e3, again, we would follow with bishop f5 and same ideas with e4 as we've seen before. And here white has some small ideas that are interesting. We'll start with a3 and h3. Both are some kind of waiting moves, but they are preventing bishop b4 at some cases. They are getting ahead of b4, bishop b2. So the idea here for white is to kind of fix the queenside and then try to castle. Yeah, it's a bit more ambitious, but it's interesting. And here I found some very weird idea that was kind of funny, and I thought could be interesting. And also you can surprise all of your opponents, which is bishop g4. The main idea is that we are pinning the e2 pawn to play queen b6. Yeah, so white wouldn't really be expecting this. It's very creative and also not so easy to face. And for instance, b4 would be a threat. Now we can play bishop d4 and queen b6 will follow up. Let's say even if f3, queen b6 is very interesting. We'll see these kind of positions that we give up a piece, but basically now we are developing all the rest of the pieces, like something like take here, and here knight c6. This is a common theme. And since white cannot take because we are playing rook d8, we're getting all the pieces. And this is, I feel this is much fun, and also it's kind of reasonable. Let's say f3 looks, for me, it looks logical. I mean, it weakens a lot the king side, but it's a bit logical to play e4. Yeah. Now bishop d7 is the easiest way, and now. It's a bit different if white also already played before, because it's much more weakening to the knight on c3, and therefore we will play, I think queen b6 would be great. And now after e4, because now, for instance, before it's changes a bit. I'll try to do a recap now, because I know it's a bit complicated maybe. Why don't we play the same idea with queen b6 here? Because now a5 would be great, because this bishop is kind of amazing, and we have a very decent compensation, I feel. And later on we'll be able to play knight h5, the queen goes, or even f5, and just to create some problems for the king. So basically here white did not commit to b4, so this plan with queen b6 here would be a bit maybe too much. I mean, it's also interesting, like we have all this kind of position, but without b4, white has a safer spot for the king, and it's not that easy to crack. So maybe I would consider that this is a bit more playable for white. Like, for instance, let's say this knight c6 idea, take rook d8, here we take the queen. Now, for instance, knight d1, and okay, white will play knight c3, e3, bishop d2, and again, it makes a huge difference having the pawn on b2, so the c3 square is much more preserved and the king is much safer. So again, this is a subtle difference, and that's why we don't overcommit here. And h3, which is kind of similar, here we'll follow with king b6. And now we take on f2, and now knight c6. This is the main position where we have this shiny idea. And also another funny thing about comparison here. Let's think about the other, the previous position, yeah? We had the same sacrifice, but with the pawn on h2. And you'd think, okay, we have more material, it should be better for white. Well, white has more material, it should be better. But in this case, actually, is even worse, I think, because after having the pawn on h2 doesn't allow to play rook h3, and suddenly a piece that would be forgotten for a while enters into action and kind of helps defending. So now this move prevents queen e3 and knight d4, which was almost winning because the king wouldn't have any kind of escape on c2. So after rook h3, knight d4, we basically threaten knight b3, so b4 is a must. a5, we wanna again pressure the king and the position. And before, just rook c8. And in general, what I like about these positions is that we don't need to do anything special. The king is so weak, the pieces from white are just doing nonsense. And for instance, some move like e3 that looks like, okay, my knight is trapped. But here is this is like the meme, no? Is it knight trapped or are you trapped with me? Because after rook fd8, basically, white cannot afford to take because I can just take with a pawn, or for instance, play knight d5 would be interesting. Or just bishop d5 could be, I feel. Almost every move could be interesting because we have all the 4 pieces going on. And after ed, where is this knight going? My knight is coming to e4 or to d3. I have bishop e3, which is really strong in combination with rook c1. And again, we have a funny position that actually is good for black, and we have 2 pieces down, but it feels like white is 2 pieces down as well. So yeah, this is kind of, also it's fun to explore. If you wanna, I love to have these positions when I was a kid and just have them on my board and just keep exploring. I highly recommend this. And just wander some moves and just get experience on the board and just have fun with these lines. Like, don't try to tone it down to engine. This will basically, let's say it's as if a child with a computer, we would do all the math exercises without thinking. It will be kind of worthless for him. So it's kind of the same in chess. So please feel free to just wonder about here. And white can also take here, but again, we just gain the rook. And again, this is a great example of how white is very passive. And all the pieces on the first rank it's kind of funny idea. And after knight g4, the crucial problem here for white is that there is not a way of easily developing the king side, nor the queen side. So basically we just take on c4, on g4, we play rook c8, and then we have some ideas with queen c6, some ideas with b5, a5, and white has a hard time coordinating the pieces. Here white has 2 pieces and a rook for the queen. This is objectively, in general, good for white, but the coordination here is lacking, so here we have much more advantage, I'd say. And let's say white plays b4, now again we target the pawn with a5, and here just knight d7 is a great example of how an extra piece for white doesn't matter that much if we can just take the pawn and the king gets open. And here, for instance, e4, we just sacrifice. And again, we have some checks because the king is have some troubles here, and basically we're coming with the rook and maybe with the other one. Because now, for instance, something like bishop d3, there are some threats with bishop h7, so maybe we want to play this rook first, so then there is no problem with bishop h7. Let's say something like knight c3, we could even... I mean, I'm pretty sure this should work, because there are not much pieces left for white to defend, but I don't know, maybe it's a bit too risky. Maybe white is still fine. Yeah, maybe it's too much. Yeah, maybe I don't need to do that. But for instance, queen d4 could be great to just keep going with knight d5. We could also take on g2 to do like some discover check, to even threat rook d5, rook c3 and bishop d4, and then we take the rook on a1. Now knight d5 is coming. Like, it's just so many threats and ideas that are just very straightforward and not that difficult for black. It's not that as if we need to play super precise. We have many alternatives that are really good, and we have such a good compensation for just a piece. So basically, this bishop g4 idea I really enjoyed because it's not really common, and pinning the e2 pawn, it's not something you would see quite often. And yeah, basically white is struggling already. So this a3, I mean, it's not the most common move, but has been played many games, and this bishop g4, I really enjoyed that. So we follow a3 with, let's assume your opponent knows our preparation, no? And plays h3 instead. I mean, this move looks also a bit silly, but the main idea is to have g4 and bishop g2 and kind of get some presence on the center pretty quickly, and also threaten g5 and kind of also prevent knight g4 ideas. And here again we will follow bishop f5. We could also go for e4 and then try to play h6 and then rook e8. Why would we need to play h6? Because here we did not force white to play e3, so this bishop can get out, and white will be happy to exchange a couple pieces. This is and to let's say consolidate the d5 pawn. So here bishop a5, I feel it's more on the flavor of the position. And now g3 could be interesting because white feels like, okay, we prevented knight g4, might as well play now normally. But now knight e4. Basically we threaten f2, white needs to do something. And if white takes, this is terrible because we're threatening the rook, and also we would regain the pawn, and something like this, the pawn structure is terrible. And basically we are not even a pawn down, so we can just play chess and win. Yeah. So e3 is a must. And now queen f6 is a very fun idea. We threaten knight f2. Basically, we don't allow white to get comfortable. If white gets to castle and we don't have any compensation or any, let's say, e4 and get the knight or anything, we should be wary. So again, this line requires you to have some kind of feeling of, okay, I cannot get comfortable. I need to do something dynamic. Yeah? And now queen e2, basically, if knight d2, we have the same idea with bishop b4. The idea is to reinforce and to allow bishop b4 to happen. And here black doesn't have white doesn't have an easy way to counter this, because here we had some kind of a hidden trick with knight f2. Yeah. But here it doesn't work. If bishop c2 trying to threaten the queen, queen f3. And if bishop g4 trying to threaten the queen, knight f3 just works beautifully. But here, for instance, if bishop b4, let's say some move like queen b3, knight f2 now should work, because now there is no way to kind of not lose the queen. Yeah. So yeah, we have many many threats, many ideas. I feel this line goes a lot with the Benoni, with the dynamics, and basically it's kind of the same vibe. So queen e2 is a sad, but it's a must. And now bishop b4. It's really nice. Basically, we want to get a lot of presence on the light squares. And here, white has some very concrete problems for the simplest moves. So bishop g2. We want to play queen g6. Why? Again, what's the idea for white? The castle. So queen g6 basically prevents a castle because we are threatening take and bishop d3. And actually, no matter what white does, we will be able to do that. And then follow with knight d7, with d4, knight d5, and basically white cannot castle. We have all the control of the light squares. And again, white doesn't get to play with the rooks, so we are material up, basically almost winning. So bishop d2 is somewhat of a must. And now bishop c3 and taking everything, in this case with the knight. And now bishop e4. And this is, I feel, like an excellent position because white doesn't have the right to castle long, short. We need to castle long. We have some weaknesses on the light squares. And for instance, some rook g1 take, white cannot even castle long for a couple of reasons, bishop a2 or also bishop f3 winning the exchange. So again, white it will be struggling. We have an easier position and we already don't have a pawn down. So yeah, this idea with the light squares, again, this line will require some precision, but I feel it's worth, like all the positions are amazing for black. And we get some crazy complications for our opponent that wants to play safe. That's why he played knight f3 in the third move. So here g4, finally, it's another creative idea. But here bishop e4, I feel it's much more easy. And here, for instance, f3 is a bit too much. We just play bishop g6 and white will never be able to castle. And white is so weak. And basically, we don't need to do anything crazy. We just keep developing. Let's say knight d7, maybe some b5, be interesting to, let's say, to power up queen b6 and to prevent knight a4. We have some interesting sacrifices. And also, the shade of queen h4 is also very worrisome for white. I don't know. This is just simply good. And now, in case of... this could be also simply good with bishop g6, but here we can afford for more. Here knight d5. The thing is, after queen h4, this is somewhat of a draw. I don't know, this is just a messy line that works, but I prefer bishop d5 as an answer. Bishop g6 would be the move that, okay, you don't remember, this is tricky because white has an extra pawn, but yeah, just play. So bishop d5. Here it feels like we lose a piece. That's why I wanted to notice that bishop g6, you might be scared, you might not remember. It's like, wait, but what was the move here? Because I'm losing a piece. Okay, you can still play. Yeah. And now queen b6. Again, the same idea with bishop f2. And now white has a couple ways to play around. Here, basically e3 or rook h2 are the main moves. White cannot take on d5 because bishop f2 first, and now we just regain the piece. And it's not advisable for white to just take here because maybe just bishop f2 and rook d8, and white will be losing the queen pretty time soon. And knight c6. I mean, we don't even need to commit to anything special. Like now, for instance, knight c6 should be easily winning. We don't need to sacrifice everything and to get 2 pieces down. Just knight c6 and explain me how white is reacting to this, all the threats. Yeah. And if knight d5, rook d5 is excellent because white cannot take thanks to the double check. So white needs to prevent bishop f2, and there is this funny move rook h2. And now this idea is kind of similar as white keeps all the threats with g5 and 10. I think e3 is a bit more precise because white gives up the pawn and now has all the pieces. But here, okay, it's a great example of why this position is just rook d8, and now just take out the bishop, and now knight c6, and again, we don't need to do something fancy, we just have a very good compensation. So let's compare this position to rook h2. We just kept play rook d8, and here we just play bishop b6, and again, we just play knight c6, and we have an excellent compensation. I don't know, we just don't need to do anything super fancy, and the pieces are just terribly awkward for black. I don't know, this is, again, I feel this is a great experience for you if you have it on a board, you try to play with some friends with on internet, or I don't know, or with the engine, because it's a position that requires dynamics, requires thinking, okay, my opponent doesn't have a way to develop, what move would love my opponent do, and yeah. And here knight e4 is a bit better, finally. And after e3, I feel this is the simplest. We keep it with the development, and now f5. And this feels to me like a very safe position, because the blockade on d6 will negate basically the extra pawn from white, and the bishop on g2 will be kind of isolated. And after knight d6, we will try to play for e4, knight e5, and basically thanks to g4, the king will be always weak, and we have just a general good compensation. The queen might shift to h4. Basically, our game plan is much easier, and our opponent might be struggling. So this f5 will be a topic that we will see many times. So yeah, so it's kind of known. So finally, we enter the main line, which is g3. White tries to basically castle, bishop g2, and play safe. So here we need to annoy them. So here we play knight g4. And then straight away, we just go for the kill. That's why h3 was interesting, that's why e3 was interesting, that's why a3 was interesting. So again, this is very straightforward. I really like how it turned out to be, this chapter. And here white has a couple ideas, maybe e3 and maybe knight e4. Let's start with knight e4, it's a bit more committal. And here we just take out the bishop, and basically this knight, we will play f5 immediately, the next move. In case of h3, f5, and white needs to take, we pressure here, whites need to play e3, queen f6, we threaten f2, like it's very straightforward, we keep doing threats. And now after rook h2, which is maybe a more logical defense maneuver, we just play queen g6 to play bishop g4, and then develop the rest of the pieces. Here, if bishop e2, we just play knight d7, knight f6, this is just great. And here after g5 is an idea, actually is a break for white, like trying to exchange the queens and to lose the pressure. And here, after just taking, just bishop f5. And here g6, knight d7, and we have an excellent, I feel, position. Like, The knight will go to f6, then we'll have chances to play knight g4, rook c8, rook d8, and we'll have chances to take the pawn. So we are not even a pawn down, and white still has some answers to do with the development, and we have a very simple, straightforward development. So I feel this position is great for white, for black, sorry. And here there is the other option to play e3, and after f5, we remember that here, I mean, if white tries to be fancy and now play knight c3, f4 would be demolishing. Like we have the bishop here, the rook, the knight, everything pointing to f2. So you imagine you can start sacrificing and enjoying life. And after bishop e2, it's a funny idea that after, if we take bishop g4 would be possible. Here we want to take with knight a3. And after here, bishop e4, we take on e4. And here already we don't have the pawn down. And our development is very easy. We want to play bishop h3 in one take. So here, let's say white wants to tackle the e4 pawn. Here, bishop h3 is amazing because not only it threatens, well, it kind of hinders the king's situation, but also knight e4 is prevented because of bishop g2. So here, let's say if bishop f3, we could even play bishop g2, could be interesting. Maybe here we could start with taking here. And my idea would be to play now bishop g2 and now bishop f3. For instance, this should be an excellent. Now we can have this pass pawn, we can have the rook here. I feel the pass pawn is even more appealing, and then the knight is just coming. So we have a lot of dynamic options here, and the position is very much easy to play, and we are just move 11, and white has so many problems to face off. And here, finally, e3 is the main idea. Now we play e5. Basically, we somewhat threaten f4. Let's say white can play h3, which is less precise. Like white needs to keep being fast with development. And now knight f6, and here we can play e4. And this is a very known theme, and white has this weak square. That's why we play knight g4 again. So here is a funny idea with knight bd7. Let's say castle, and here we could follow with bishop b6, bishop a6. And we get all the presence of the light squares. And white still has some troubles developing everything. And later on knight d5, and we will conquer all the light squares. So we don't worry about the d5 pawn. Eventually we'll be able to take it, but the dominance is absurd. So here white has the alternative to play bishop b2, which is much more logical. And now we want to keep developing. We cannot play f4 because we would be missing the knight. So here we play knight d7. Yeah? And basically, we just want to keep accelerating development. And white has many tries here. Let's say white just wants to take the pawn. And here taking with the queen would be too much. I feel like after knight f6, the bishop comes to h3, and we will be able to take on d5. The king doesn't castle. So whenever the king doesn't castle, we already have some kind of mid-term compensation because we are so far ahead in development, and some moves like b5 sacrificing and deviating the knight from d5, and this style of moves appear into the whole. So here knight e4 is an interesting move to threaten this pawn. And it has been played many times with white, but the king looks a bit weak in the light squares. But okay, the pawn on g5, the g4, gives us the f3 square, but also kind of restricts this bishop, so it's a double-edged sword. And here I recommend b6 to play bishop a6 and to activate the bishop, since this pawn is blockading this diagonal. And after rook e1, just queen e8. I feel this is the best plan. Because we would just want to play queen g6 and double the rooks and pressure on f2, since we have like almost everything pointing to the king. And in case of queen g4, we just want to exchange the knights. And now this position is almost lost for white, because we would just play queen f7 and rook f8, and tell me how you're exactly going to defend the f2 pawn. Again, most of the lines, as the Benoni, are justified by dynamics, which is something I really enjoy. And here, castle is the main line, basically. White finally has castled, so it should be happy. So here we go with knight f6. We bring up another piece. We just want to develop the last piece. Maybe the queen goes through h5. No, we just keep developing for now. After h3 immediate is a bit imprecise. Knight h6, knight d2. Like we cannot afford to take. In general, we don't want to look at d5, yeah, because for instance now we would lose the queen. But in general, the pawn on d5 is actually helpful because white cannot exchange the queens, cannot play for the king side easily. So here knight f7 is much better because we want to play f4 and we also just want to play safe. Yeah. And we can play f4 already, but now g4 would be interesting, ef and g4. Well, the position is very much messy because also knight e4 is coming, but knight f7 first. And now we kind of threat f4, and white doesn't have an easy move. Let's say, because some move like knight c4 that looks appealing. Now f4 is very nice because knight d4, which is an annoying answer for white, wouldn't be possible anymore. For instance, here g4, now b5. Now knight e4 and white is busted. It's funny how the e4 square is kind of the key most of the time, yeah? Now queen h4 would basically win. Like the king is too weak and the knight will go for g5, the f5 will be open. Like everything comes to the king, yeah? You keep sacrificing. And if king h2, that looks like passive, but basically defense, gets ahead of f4, just play b6, bishop b7, and suddenly we can easily take on d5, and white is still struggling to develop anything. So, yeah, like knight f7 is a very interesting move that gets ahead of knight c4, threading e5. So yeah, it's to keep the good balance between attacking and developing. Yeah, which is also very hard. So knight d2 is kind of the main move, straightforward. Queen e8, we just go all in. Yeah. Now h3 is a must. Knight h6. This is a bit better for black, for white, objectively, because we play queen e8 instead of knight f7. But still looks very interesting. And if king h2, just queen g6. And here I really like this plan of knight f7, queen h6. It's not that common, but basically with the queen there, we'll have permanent pressure to h3, to the king will be weak, and the position is very frail. We will see a model game of this line that ended very quickly for white. And yeah, I feel this position is just very unpleasant for white. I mean, white had the goal to play something safe with knight f3, but we have an excellent position here. Knight a4 was tried recently. After bishop e4, knight c3. The idea was for white to just get this bishop out of here, but already it's very sad that it needs to do a repetition. And now after knight f7, for instance, would be excellent. Bishop d7, rook d8, and eventually we'll take this pawn. This could be perfectly fine. Like, again, you can commit to f4 and be a bit crazy, but you can also just play for the d5 pawn and development, which is somewhat fine as well. And it's important to play knight f7, so knight c4 and d6 are not added together, because we have an e5, we need to defend, suddenly d6, and suddenly we get passive, yeah? So we need to be a bit wary, but we can also do. f4 was played, and here king g2 was a game, but here after here, bishop d6, this we will be seeing in the model game. But for instance, knight c4 was tried, but queen d7 is so strong. And again, we have all the pieces pointing to the king, yeah, like everything. And white has so many pieces that are completely irrelevant to the defense of the king. So, to g4, f3, and here not even taking the bishop, knight g4, and basically the game is completely over. Knight f2 is a threat, knight h2 is also a threat, and the king is just lost, yeah. So, overall I feel this line is just amazing to get a game, a very dynamic game, and it's a bit different of the Benoni in the sense of the patterns, but it's a lot of, it's the same style, and basically you can get easy, quick wins, most of it. But I highly encourage you to be wary of the move orders and the threats. I mean, it's generally very straightforward because mostly we play knight g4, we kind of want to threat f2. Against a3, there is this funny bishop g4, which is kind of weird, but works very well. And yeah, maybe the only concern here would be to be a bit wary of move orders, but for the rest of it, it's very interesting, very flashy, and you will have some very interesting games. And yeah, I actually played a couple times this line, and it's very much fun. And yep. Without further ado, I think this line is very interesting. If people try to put the break and not enter into the Benoni or the Volga, the Benko, you will have a very fun time with this line. And yep, I hope you get some wins, and also as usual, if you have some games with it, if you get to experience the line, please feel free to send me. I really enjoy when I have a lot of students. I really enjoy to see what's the outcome of the course, if something can be improved, and something wasn't easy, and yeah, for sure. So yeah, hope you enjoy this line, and see you in another video.